Fauci's warning on testing this morning as the White House coronavirus task force is Anthony Fauci's warning and saying something's not working. That's Dr. Anthony Fauci's. Good morning, I'm Chris Jansing. Something's not working. Good morning, I'm Chris Jansing. Something's not working. That's Dr. Anthony Fauci's warning on testing this morning as the White House coronavirus task force is getting ready to brief the American people for the first time in nearly 2 months. That briefing getting started in just a couple of hours, and it will be led by Vice President Mike Pence. It comes as the situation across the U.S. is increasingly dire, a direct contradiction to what the president has been saying. Multiple states are hitting record numbers for new infections, forcing the Texas governor to now hit pause on reopening. ICU capacity for the Houston area has hit 100%. And on the same day when the government reported nearly 500,000 people who lost their jobs during this pandemic enrolled in health care coverage under Obamacare, the administration filed a late-night brief to the Supreme Court to wipe out the Affordable Care Act. That move could cost about 20 million Americans their health insurance in the middle of a pandemic. Let's get right to NBC's Monica Alba at the White House, Sam Brock in Houston, and Joe Fryer in Phoenix. Monica, in recent days, we have seen yet more disconnect between what the vice president and his boss have been saying and what folks like Anthony Fauci and even Republican governors have been worried about. What can we expect at this briefing today?
Chris, I think it's really a sign of the seriousness. The White House acknowledging this uptick in cases is something that needs to be addressed by the task force, which of course has continued to meet throughout the pandemic behind closed doors, but we haven't seen them come out and take questions and address the American people in now nearly 2 months. It's significant as we're now hearing from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is saying the U.S. may need a completely new testing strategy, telling the Washington Post they're going to look at other modeling, what other countries have done in terms of pool testing, taking a completely different approach because clearly something has not been contributing to a better picture and something, as they have said, is not working. This also comes as the CDC is expanding the list of people who could be susceptible to severe illness from coronavirus. And we reported last week that the task force members, some of them had actually been urging the White House to resume these near daily press conferences. You remember at the beginning of the pandemic, you had them for many days and hours on end, but then the president started to join them, and oftentimes they would deviate from the topic at hand, from the health crisis to other things. It's notable that today's briefing is going to be taking place at Health and Human Services, not here at the White House grounds, and there is no plans for the president to join. So it does seem this complete briefing will be focused on the pandemic, not other topics. We're hopeful they're going to be addressing the uptick in cases, also the latest developments on plans for a vaccine. Chris.
Yeah, there are so many questions out there for them to answer, and part of it is what's going on in many of these states. So, Sam, another record day for Texas. Now the governor has pushed the pause button on reopening. What's the situation like there on the ground today?
Yeah, there's no question, Chris, good morning, that the biggest development on the ground, the biggest point of concern right now is the ICU bed base capacity hitting 100% in the Houston area. Now, there's a caveat to that. The president and CEO of Houston Methodist, which is one of the largest providers here in this area, came out yesterday and said we looked at our ICU capacity numbers last year at this time in June before the pandemic, and it was 95%. So they are accustomed, he said, to working in and around that level of capacity. The problem is 1 out of every 4, and really now closer to 1 out of every 3 of those ICU bed patients has COVID-19. And the numbers in Texas, Chris, are eye-popping on a daily basis. Yesterday, the state announcing almost exactly 6,000 new cases in a single day. I had the opportunity to speak with Houston's Mayor Sylvester Turner and asked him about his level of concern right now on those hospitalization numbers. Do you think there's been unnecessary alarm when it comes to hospitalization numbers?
The situation is bad. We're in the midst of a healthcare crisis. It's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. And so now what you have to do, you have to go to that next step. What's the next best tool that we can utilize? And that's this. And so now with this, you have to make sure it doesn't become politicized, that it's not tied to an ideology. That's why we all have to be speaking the same voice.
Now, within the last 24 hours, Governor Abbott has also taken other executive action. He suspended elective surgeries at hospitals in 4 different counties in Texas, the 4 that are most impacted right now. And Chris, as you mentioned, he paused the reopening. But the question is, what kind of effect will that actually have in Texas when bars, restaurants, amusement parks, carnivals, bowling alleys, theaters, you name it, have all been reopening, and restaurants, Chris, right now are open at 75% capacity. Governor Abbott has given no indication to this point that he would be rolling any of that back. Chris?
Well, I'm curious, Sam, when you're out and about, and understanding this is totally just anecdotal, but what are you seeing? Are most people wearing masks? What's your sense of how seriously folks are taking this where you are?
I have definitely seen a lot of masks in the last several days. I will also tell you, yesterday, Chris, I walked into a Starbucks, got my coffee, and I watched someone walk right in with no mask on and no regard for anyone around us. And I asked him, why are you not wearing a mask? And he said, do you have a mask? Can you give me a mask? So there are questions right now about resources, but at this point in time, the state has said if you go and get testing for COVID-19, we're going to give you a mask, more than one. We're going to give you several masks. There really is, it's hard to find an excuse at this point for not wearing one. For the most part, Chris, what I'm seeing is people are trying to stick to that, but clearly too many are not.
All right, Joe, the striking statistic I saw there is that in Maricopa County, which includes Phoenix, they're eclipsing New York boroughs on their worst day of the pandemic in terms of the number of cases. Now, I know you're at one of the biggest COVID testing sites in the area. What's the latest there?
Yeah, so this is the state fairgrounds, which has now been transformed into a massive coronavirus testing site. They test at least 1,000 people here a day, 6 days a week. The testing will start in about an hour here, and what will happen is those who have an appointment will come in and register. The cars will pull up and line up going into what is normally known as the agriculture center. Instead, inside, that's where people get the test. It is the nasal swab. Tests are in huge demand here in Arizona. It can be hard to get an appointment. When places do those drive-through clinics on the weekend, the lines are incredibly long. It can take hours to wait. Some people are turned away. And even if you do get a test, the labs are backed up here, so it can take some people, say, a week or longer to get your results. That's a major issue in a place where the cases are spiking at such an alarming rate. ICU beds here in this state now 88% full, and the fear is that number is going to go up too. That concerns doctors and healthcare workers. We heard from one here in Arizona. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We're surging in Arizona. So this is basically, I would say this is Tinder waiting to explode, but I'm thinking that some of that has already been lit. And that is concerning, both based on my experiences in the shifts over the last couple of weeks and based on what the data show coming for the next few weeks. I think it's going to be really bad.
Governor Doug Ducey says the state will be taking more steps to improve testing here. He held a news conference yesterday about coronavirus, basically urging people here to be more cautious, to try to socially distance, to try and stay home as much as possible. But he did not put any new restrictions in place, no new mandates to try and get things under control here. Chris?
Monica, I want to go back to you really quickly because we just heard the facts on the ground in places like Texas and Arizona. What's the president saying now? What's the latest we've heard from him on this?
Well, while he was in Wisconsin yesterday, Chris, he taped a town hall with Fox News that was not really about the coronavirus pandemic, but in the brief moments where it came up, he made a dubious claim about testing. Take a listen to what he said.
So we have more cases because we do the greatest testing. If we didn't do testing, we'd have no cases. So when you do 30 minutes, you're going to have a kid with the sniffles, and they'll say it's coronavirus, whatever you want to call it. I said the other night, there are so many names to this that I could name 19 names.
This comes after the president, remember, said he told officials to slow the testing down. The White House said he was kidding about that. He came out and said, I don't kid. Last night, again, he seemed to imply that was a joke. Again, it's pretty clear the president seems to believe if there aren't testing, there won't be cases, which is quite false, as you know, Chris.
Monica Alba, Sam Brock, Joe Fryer, thank you all very much. And joining me now is MSNBC medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel, a fellow at the Brookings Institution who served in the Obama administration as the White House Health Policy Director. Look, obviously terrible situations in places like Texas, Arizona. They're not alone because 23% of counties in America now have what is described as uncontrollable growth. How did we get here, and what can we do about it? Because I'm hearing things like, if something doesn't happen in some of these places in the next couple of days, it's going to be hard to reverse.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Chris, and the reporting reflects that. So how did we get here? Number one, it's not just the reopening. It was reopening without having kind of the proper public health measures in place. So, not emphasizing masks, not asking for physical distancing, and then perhaps even more devastating is not having all that contact tracing, kind of sourcing where people are getting infections from. Also, on top of that, I would argue we actually weren't doing enough testing, despite what the president is saying, which is wrong, factually incorrect. We weren't doing enough testing. So we did not have to go this route. But to your point, what do we need to do? We absolutely, Dr. Fauci is trying to kind of explore, and others, we absolutely need to kind of continue to ramp up testing. Chris, we need to emphasize in these states that we can still reopen the economy if people feel comfortable going out and being safe. So we can ask people to wear masks, just like the mayor of Houston did. And then finally, we're talking about ICUs being full. We're asking for people to make room in our hospitals for people basically to be hospitalized and die, but we're not asking them to do the things to prevent them from going to the hospital. And that's what we need to do in the next 24 hours.
There was a headline in the Washington Post today that said, how Arizona lost control. And I want to just play what Democratic Congressman Ruben Gallego said last night on MSNBC about the governor there.
It's a lack of leadership. It's a lack of courage from this governor. And it's largely due because he's taking cues from the president. Today he had this very dramatic press conference about how he decided that this is going really sideways. Well, where was he 2 days ago? 2 days ago, he was in a crowded area with the president of the United States without a mask mandate being enforced inside that area.
So let me ask you about the press conference today. How important is this briefing? First one in months, at a time when a lot of people are looking around their states and seeing something like we saw here in New York months ago.
Yeah, it's very important to actually have kind of clarifying messages that are responsible. However, Chris, you and I have seen this before, and we have not necessarily received that. Putting it outside the White House, as we've reported on, is actually, I think, a signal that the president won't be there, of course, and that this may not be as important as it would be if it were in the briefing room. But I do think that it's important for Americans, particularly, Chris, I want to emphasize in states like I'm in the D.C. area, we have seen a decrease, but we could see this ping pong phenomenon if we don't really all work together. So it's incredibly important that we have a federal, national voice on this, and I'm going to be watching, as you will, to understand if that actually takes place.
Well, I'm sure you saw this, that Dr. Fauci told the Washington Post today on testing, and I'm going to quote him here. We said it at the top of the show. Something's not working. I mean, you can do all the diagramming you want, but something is not working. What you need to do is find the penetration of infected people in your society, and the only way you know that is by casting a broad net. What's he talking about? What's this new approach, this new testing strategy that we expect to hear more about today at the briefing?
Yeah, the brief concept that he's referring to is called pooled testing. By the way, countries like India and Germany and others are actually doing this, where they're going to try to test, millions of people at a time. And Chris, basically what it is think about 100 people all giving those nasal or oral swab samples to get COVID tested. But instead of testing one at a time, Chris, we batch everything together. Consider, you give a swab, 100 other people give a swab, pool them together, and then just batch test that whole sample. And then if it's all negative, you're able to run those tests much quicker. And if you find some positives, then of course you have to do it one by one. So it's a way to get to an incredibly large numbers of people quickly without those delays, because I said it before and I'll say it again, we're still having a problem getting the adequate tests. So that's what Dr. Fauci is talking about. Other countries are doing it, and we should learn and do it here.
I'm going to weigh in on what they're talking about here pertaining to the testing, the coronavirus. Whenever you have all this misguided misinformation on not only mainstream media but social media, to the point that you have a chief and commander that has never really accepted this as it being true and this serious. Whenever you're putting out these type of mixed messages to society over here in America, you're going to have chaos. Because once more, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in the time of a crisis or an emergency. And I guess it's going to take literal people dying in masses amounts before people are going to wake up to realize the seriousness of this disease. I was listening to a doctor the other day that said even if you're a young person and you experience this disease and you get over it, it still leaves such scar tissue in the lungs. It's almost like glass has been thrown into the internal layers of your lungs, that eventually there will be some sort of lung emphysema or some sort of long-term breathing problems out of this disease. Even though you're young enough or you got the right blood or the right DNA to the point that you can kick it off and it doesn't kill you right away. In other words, if it doesn't kill you, it'll lame you. And as it's laming you, you won't be able to operate sufficiently as you would have been if you never caught it to begin with. That's my whole analogy that I'm standing on. There's no doubt that the coronavirus, I guess and I know this is going to sound unhumanitarian whenever I say this, there's no doubt that there's certain people in society, not just here in America, but all over the world, that the medical professionals have taken advantage of these people's problems to the point that they're basically panhandling off of their insurance, or they're panhandling off of their social structure to keep these people alive. And to be quite honest with you, it's probably more unhumanitarian by keeping them alive than it would be if you just went ahead and let them become deceased. And like I said, I realize that sounds awful. That sounds gross. It sounds wrong. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people out there that are going through such strenuous conditions in their lives, regardless whether they was born with it or they was involved in a major accident or they just become old and ill to the point that they've got lots of problems. If there is a silver lining to this, that would probably be it towards mercy killings. But the thing about it is, it's not just attacking the elderly. It's not just attacking those who have desperate medical problems that are already teeter-tottering to the point of being non-productive to society. It is hitting not just the vulnerable, but the young. It is damaging our future in our abilities towards where we are to go towards becoming a predominant force to be reckoning with as an American citizens in the regard towards us achieving the things that we achieve today. I mean, if you got a bunch of people that's sick, coughing, hacking, can't get their breath, can't take the heat, can't do this, can't do that, can't go here, can't go there, it is going to affect the long-term productivity of this country. You have to look at things in that same sense. What is going on here? Why is it going on? What has happened for this to occur? I truly believe that God has lifted his hand of protection And now we are suffering because of sin, the ramifications of a sinful lifestyle. Because if you'll look, where it attacks a lot of these areas is places like open pools, open beaches, big banquets, big parties. If you look, it becomes a hot spot in these areas. Even as Donald Trump has some of his rallies, we know for a fact that it just turns into a hot spot because you're passing one person's germs over to another person's germs. Even with all this protesting going on, people being out in the street screaming and hollering at one another, being less than 3 or 4 feet from one another, hollering, screaming, yelling. All that is doing is creating a cesspool for the disease to travel from one person to another person, from that person to another person. And the thing about this disease is, first of all, we're finding out that hot and cold weather ain't going to have no effect in its ability to pass from one person to the other. It may have a certain ability whenever it comes to the lethalness of it, towards it not killing people quite as much as what it would be in the dead winter, but it's still active, it's still growing, it's still evolving, it's still mutating into what it's mutating into. And one that hears what I'm talking about right now may say, well, how do you know all this stuff? Well, it's obvious. If you'll study the Spanish flu and other major pandemics that has hit this world, going all the way back, I guess, to the Bible days, whenever they had leprosy and they was sticking people off in caves. There's certain characteristics towards what it does and how often that it stays active. And it doesn't matter if it's polio, tuberculosis, it doesn't matter if it's Lou Gehrig's disease or some other type of disease. And the thing about it is, you know, this is something that we're probably going to have to end up living with. The same way with a different strand of flu. It's something that we're going to have to live with on a year-to-year basis, and until our antibodies build up to the point that it won't have a near as effect on us, we're going to have to deal with this stuff because they have not come out with a vaccine, and to be quite honest with you, they may not. That's looking at it from a practical reality standpoint. I hope that they do. I hope that they come out with a cure tomorrow, to the point that they can give people a vaccine shot and this disease won't no longer affect them. I personally believe that it's got as much to do with a spiritual form, a spiritual entity, as it does a biological entity. I realize that there's germs, there's parasites, there's all kinds of stuff out there that if you get around it, it's going to eat you alive. Your survival rate of being exposed to this is probably slim to none. But then I also realize the spirituality pertaining to the teachings of Christ that taught us that if we drink of anything deadly, if something around us is trying to harm us or hurt us, that it will not be able to until God says that it's able to. And I put more of an emphasis on my spiritual soul, that no man can pluck you from the Father's hand, or that if you drink of anything or eat of anything, that it will not hurt you, pertaining to your spiritual soul. I put more emphasis on the spiritual soul, the spiritual arena, than I do the physical body. Because nothing will hurt you if you have accepted Christ into your life. But you must understand, you're living in a temple. You're living in a body, okay? I don't care if before all this hit, you could run 20K and go through every marathon and win. I don't care if you could go through the iron lung deal to where it takes, 4 or 5 days to do this. You climb, you bike, you go underwater, you swim, you snow ski, you do several different things just to become a winner. I don't care how healthy that a person is. once this disease hits you, it can knock you upside down. I don't care if you're in your 20s and you're just now beginning to start living your life. It can affect you. And even though it may not kill you, it can damage you for other long-term problems in the future pertaining to emphysema, pertaining to any type of lung disease, lung cancer, etc. You keep in mind, we're living in a society nowadays to where carbon dioxide, I think, is a major contributor to cancer. Because we're steadily breathing in fumes that we're not supposed to be breathing in. We're steadily eating products on our table that has been exposed to fumes. So the things that we are breathing has a long-term effect towards what we're going to be like 10 years from now, 2 years from now, 6 months from now, pertaining to a healthy, productive society. We must follow all the red lights and the red flags that are going off right now in regards to this coronavirus, this COVID-19. If not, it could absolutely be devastating to the security of the United States and our future affairs. I am thoroughly convinced of that. The damage that we are receiving right now, we can't even begin to fathom of what it's going to do to us a year from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. Because it's wreaking havoc upon to society in one form or the other. So our professional world is letting us down whenever it comes to us giving us good sound advice. And of course, whenever you have leadership such as Donald Trump that wants to make light of all this stuff for some reason, he himself has not put on a mask until just recently. Whenever you have people that's giving out all these mixed messages, it becomes careless to the point that it goes into another stage of being reckless. Once you become reckless in a society, then God only knows what could happen to us. Because we did not pay attention to the signs. We did not listen to the professionals. We was listening to a clown in a circus show versus listening to the professionals. I have been around professional people all my life, from the age of 2 weeks, from on throughout various close encounters of death. I've been around professional people that speak a lot of times out of great knowledge, out of great science, that they understand what this bone does, what this organ does, what this vein does, what this vein does. If you plug up this vein, there's going to be consequences in this vein. If you shut this down, this is going to be shut down. I've listened to professional people all my life. And I put a lot of emphasis upon my life towards me being where I am right now because of those professional people. Those people told me, Dennis, if you do this, this is going to happen. But if you do this, more than likely this is going to happen. You know, they have already went through the process of elimination with other people in other countries, thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They have seen what this chemical does to this bone. They have seen what this chemical does to this artery. They have seen what this chemical does to this organ. So because they have a pamphlet to go by, they can now speak with volumes in regard to, hey, according to the science knowledge, if you do this, this is what's going to happen to that. It's kind of like getting hooked on drugs or getting hooked on tobacco. If you get hooked on tobacco, odds are it's going to affect your breathing ability on down the road, and you're going to have more of a higher chance of becoming exposed to cancer. We've got all these different problems from A to Z, and we need to start paying attention to the people that knows more about these problems than some bimbo that wants to act like that he knows about the problems, but in reality he's only exacerbating the problem because he is not letting the medical professional world do their jobs. And whenever you have a leader that is doing this, it's not just careless, it becomes reckless, it becomes dangerous to our society. It becomes harmful. In other words, we're going to see people be damaged and hurt that if we would have just paid a little more attention to what the professional world was telling us, maybe we could have avoided that type of hurt. Maybe we could have avoided that type of problem. That's the whole reason why you have experienced people that can give out good sound advice. Maybe they can prevent from us having to walk up to the oven and touch it just to see if it's hot, so we leave a burn mark on our fingers and on our hands. If we're smart enough to listen to our teachers that tell us ahead of time, don't touch the oven. The oven is hot. And we don't touch the oven, and we realize that if we touch the oven, it's going to burn, then we have prevented ourselves from going through that type of pain, agony, and yes, a lot of times even scar tissue damage. Do you follow what I'm saying? Please, it has reached a very critical time again pertaining to this coronavirus, and it's almost like taking one step forward and now two steps back. I use the analogy of a mountain climber going up this long mountain, and the mountain is steep, and it's wet, and it's got roots here and there and grass growing on it here and there. And this mountain climber, about the time he or she thinks that he's got a good footing, all of a sudden he slips and he goes down the mountain about 8 or 10 feet. And finally he grabs a hold of another limb or another twig, and the twig breaks, and he goes down the mountain another 7 or 8 or 10 feet. And instead of him actually going up the mountain, he's actually going down the mountain. The whole time he or she is struggling. They're moving, but they're not going nowhere. And if they're going anywhere, they're going in the wrong direction, because ultimately, once they get down to the bottom of that mountain, what's going to be down there? What's going to be down at the bottom of the mountain? Whenever we have statistics that continue to keep flagging us again and again and again, and we ignore those statistics, then we have no one to blame but ourselves, because we did not listen to the professional world. The people that knows that if you touch that oven, it is going to hurt.
Okay, I have to ask you before you go, as someone who worked on the Affordable Care Act, about the Trump administration overnight going to the Supreme Court to overturn it, filing, I think, an 82-page brief. I'll emphasize this again. On the very same day that we learned that about 500,000 people who have lost their jobs through the coronavirus, because of all the people who have lost their jobs now getting coverage through Obamacare. But what would that mean for millions of Americans in the midst of a pandemic?
Yes, this is, I mean, talk about kind of, double-faced in so many ways. This is a president who's saying one thing about, not wanting to do more tests, and completely undercutting the foundations of being able to get basic health care in the United States. And it's President Obama had the courage to do this, even though he's faced some obstacles in Congress. And what this means is that if this gets overturned, the Affordable Care Act, then all of these Americans this year and potentially in the future diagnosed with coronavirus, for example, Chris, could be labeled as a pre-existing condition and be denied health insurance.
There you go. Be denied health care insurance because now they have been exposed to this COVID-19. Now get a load out of that. In other words, the very people that has insurance right now that they have paid for and worked for, sweated for, got up every morning and was loyal to the system, now may be possibly facing the fact that they can't even be insured. That is a horrible, horrible, insensitive thought to even think of. You got all these people out here on the streets that have lost their jobs. They was the type of people that was already basically living week to week to begin with. You got all these mothers that's trying to feed these babies that they've got. You've got chaos. But at the same time, you got a president that wants to take away the funding. And it says, well, it eventually is going to go away. It's really because we're testing too much. No, it is not that we're testing too much. The disease is out there. The invisible killer is out there, lurking, waiting for its next victim. And I don't personally want the victim to be me. And probably anybody that hears this message would tell you the same. They don't want the victim to be them neither. And if there's something that we can do, please, let's do it. That way we don't have to walk up to the stove to determine whether or not the flame is hot because we had to touch it to leave a impaling scar up onto our lives, to be traumatized by being burnt like that. We're going to have to stop and understand what the hell is going on. Because this is not a game. These are people's lives. We're not talking about money. We can always print up more money. We can always reinvent the system. We can always create something that will take care of something. But you cannot replace human people's lives. You cannot replace people's health after it has been damaged. This coronavirus is leaving indelible scars upon the people's lives. It's almost like your lungs are very lazy to begin with. And that's the reason why they hate to put people on ventilation systems, because once the lungs gets adapted to the ventilation machine, to take them off of the machine is almost next to impossible, because the lungs become dependent upon the machine. Besides that, the lungs has already been damaged pertaining to the coronavirus. But even if you don't get on the machine, your lungs are still very lazy. It's a very thin particle, almost like a balloon, maybe a little thicker than a balloon, but it's almost like a balloon. And once you get intoxicated with this disease, it leaves scar tissue. This scar tissue that's left on your lungs is like you have breathed in a bunch of glass, and it scarred you. It cut inside your lungs. Crevices. Things that ain't supposed to be there. Okay? And even though you may get over it, you're still going to inevitably have long-term damage because of you being exposed to this disease. That's what Donald Trump don't understand. He don't understand the wickedness of this disease. Just like other diseases out there, that if you catch other diseases, it has long-term effects. It doesn't matter if it's cancer, bone cancer, crippling arthritis, other types of diseases out there has long-term. And once one thing, kind of like dominoes, once one thing gets damaged or weakened, then you have multiple things that can become damaged, because whenever one organ is no longer functioning and doing what that one organ is supposed to be doing, it actually puts more stress on the other organs, because now those other organs are having to work harder because of this. We're kind of built like a machine, you know, like let's say a combine. Let's look at a combine. A combine has a header, it has straw walkers, it has cutters, it has blowers, it has stuff that separates the dirt from the grain, but it still holds the grain. It's multitasking. A combine is one of the most complex machines probably on the face of the earth. It really is. If you get to looking at a combine and what it does from the front end all the way to the back end, it's a very complex machine. Well, we are complex people, and we have various components in our bodies that does various things. Once those components becomes ruptured or damaged, it puts more pressure on the other components, the other organs, and it turns into a domino effect to where this affects that affects this affects that, and for long, my God, you done lost a human being. You have done lost a human being. It's kind of like diabetes. My pancreas is not doing what my pancreas is supposed to be doing. Because my pancreas is not supposed to be doing, they've got me on medication. They've also got me on taking shots of trying to substitute the difference between what my pancreas was doing versus what my pancreas no longer doing. Okay? At the same time, it's not just affecting my pancreas, is not just affecting my sugar level towards it either being too high or not high enough or too low. It's also affecting other elements in my body pertaining to my immune system, to where I could just get a hangnail. I could just get a cut on my foot that wouldn't heal up, that kept festering, kept becoming abscessed, kept getting inflammation in it, to the point that now I wind up having to lose a toe, or lose a foot, or lose a leg, or lose a hand, or an arm, because of the organ that was supposed to have been taking care of that problem is no longer taking care of that problem, because it has been substituted because of the pancreas problem. One problem leads to another problem. We live in a complex body, to where if one organ is strained or damaged, it can lead into something else. These are the problems that Donald Trump does not understand, pertaining to a healthy, productive society. And yeah, we may look like we're doing okay, but in reality, if you look at the numbers, we're not okay. We are not okay at all. And we need to accept that. And it's not a weakness to understand that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. It's actually called wisdom. It's being smart. Because once you have identified where your weak link is, if you can avoid that link, throw that link out, replace that link with another link, then your chain becomes strong again. But you have to identify what link is bad. You have to identify what link is weak. Because your chain is only as strong as your weakest link. When you have a bunch of weak links, guess what? You have a calamity or a disaster of having no strong chain at all. I think the people that listen to this can understand my analogies that I'm using. Donald Trump must quit acting and pretending that he is on top of the medical industry pertaining to the pandemic that is now just roaring in other areas, towards damaging people's lungs and damaging people's lives.
Just one example of so many around all the things that the Affordable Care Act helped to put into place. So, and this is not just for a certain population. Every American has been affected by the ACA, and doing what his administration is putting forward in a document last night and asking the Supreme Court to rule on soon is just slapping the face of every American, those who have jobs.
It's appalling. It's absolutely appalling.
And those who don't. And
it's sickening. It's sickening and appalling at the same time. To think that we have a president that now wants to take this problem and put it on the back burner and ignore it away. Like Joe Biden said, you can't ignore this away. And it does not need to be politicized because we're talking about people's lives. How valuable is a human being's life? That same human being that dies today could have very well been the part of the strong link that could have prevented from other things happening to us on down the road 6 months from now or a year from now. They may have been the one that actually helped to formulate a cure-all for cancer or something. Once you get rid of that weak link, you need to replace it with a stronger link. But you have to first determine that you got a weak link. Or let's try to figure out what the hell's making the links weak to begin with, Mr. President. It's not a matter of not doing too much testing, but the fact of the matter is we're not doing enough testing in these states that are breaking out now pertaining to this outburst. It's an outbreak.
Their families.
Dr. Kavita Patel, great to have you on. I'm looking forward to talking with you in the 3 o'clock hour. We'll have had a chance to watch that briefing. I'll get your reaction then, but thank you so much. And much more ahead on the pandemic as the White House gets ready to hold that first coronavirus briefing in nearly 2 months, just a couple of hours from now. Plus, the Wall Street Journal editorial board slamming President Trump for not having a second-term agenda beyond his own grievances. How another series of new polls giving Republicans cause for concern, and millions petitioning for a new investigation into the death of an unarmed black man put in a chokehold by police in Colorado, why Elijah McClain's family is demanding justice.
The shark that.
Sounds like we got another case of police brutality. Another weak link.
This morning, another new round of polling, and the warning signs are again flashing for President Trump in key battleground states. The Fox News poll show...
I could care less about that.
What pushed a WNBA star to quit her job in the name of social justice? But first, the House today set to pass historic legislation on D.C. statehood, marking a step toward congressional representation for the district's more than 700,000 residents. NBC's Leanne Caldwell is on Capitol Hill with the latest on that. Leanne, what can you tell us about today's vote and if this could actually go somewhere?
That's right, Chris. As D.C. residents' license plates say, taxation without representation. D.C. residents pay no taxes. They serve in the military, but they have no representation in Congress. The House of Representatives is going to do their part today to try to change that. They're going to vote and for the first time pass legislation that will do just that. But it's likely to end there. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said that it's going to go nowhere in the Senate. Republicans say that it should go through the Constitution instead. But the reality is, Chris, that it is politics. They don't want 2 more Democratic members in the Senate. But first, stay here for more on MSNBC.
Lord. Just gets worse, doesn't it?
Release of yet another disturbing video, this one showing the death of Carlos Ingram Lopez on April 21st. The 27-year-old in custody and physically restrained at the time heard pleading for water and saying he could not breathe. The police chief's offer to resign rejected by the city manager and city council late yesterday. The 3 involved officers had already resigned. And in Colorado, the governor there announcing he is reopening an inquiry into last year's death of 23-year-old Elijah McClain, a black man who died after police confronted him, responding to a call about a person who appeared suspicious.
Oh, mate.
Home from the convenience.
I'm going to walk outside real quick with my viewers in explaining what I'm doing out here. Not taking none of this here lightly, but we're getting towards the end part of the development out here at the Windmill Ministries recovery shelter, the St. Dale's recovery shelter out here. And I just want to show my viewers what we have accomplished so far. I didn't realize that it was going to take so long in putting up a memorial site, but I'm sure it would be worth it in the end. We put the Purple Heart out here a few years ago that represented the Purple Heart of our military. I'm having some problems right now out of my windmill, so because of it I've taken it down. But just as easy as I took it down, I can put it back up. The problem that I'm having is it's too much slack in here. I'm gonna have to put some washers or something in there to prevent it from being so loose. But my worker and I have come in and we have decorated this up. There's a few areas that I'm gonna have to work on because I see some sprouts of grass that's already started coming up that I'm gonna have to pull or spray poison on to prevent from it escalating and getting worse. But this Purple Heart is all in conjunction of our military, because my father fought in World War II and he was combat wounded of receiving a Purple Heart. So my brother and I had our heart's desire for not just my father that fought in the military, but for all our military personnel who has ever been exposed to various combat duties representing the United States military, representing Old Glory. Like I said, we started on this memorial that my cousin calls a shrine, in which that's fine. We put up these big metal pipes right here yesterday and buried them in about 4 foot of concrete, filling the bars itself eventually full of concrete. That will help to stabilize all of this. And we finally put up the plaque that talks about the 75th anniversary in regards to all of our military, in honor of the 2nd Infantry of my father, James Robert Jackson. That was a E5, basically a sergeant in World War II, a drill sergeant, towards training other men how to become the best. I was inspired of doing this after the death. What I'm going to put right here, like I said, I haven't got it done yet, is there'll be a little chain here, a little chain in the front, And then right here will be bigger chains going down through here that'll prevent from people running into it. And if they do, they'll do severe damage to their automobiles in doing this. Like I said, I'm just in the making of doing this. It's not a finished product, but I thought that I would show my viewers what the Windmill Ministries has been up to in the past few weeks. And in the back, what inspired to finalize this was a memorial displayed after George Fred's death, May 25th, 2020. A 46-year-old man, black man, was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota during an arrest for an alleged using a $20 counterfeit bill. This has been displayed to memorialize these lives. And of course, this is all the major shootings. This ain't all the shootings, but this is the major shootings that has occurred going all the way back, I guess, to about 1986 in Edmond, Oklahoma, of various people that has died in a massacre, over 12 or more deaths at a time. Now, there's been many massacres that's had, they account a massacre of it being 4 or more people. And there's been many massacres that's happened here in America that has reached that level of being considered a massacre. But these are the mass shootings in America that we decided that we was going to put a memorial in honor of those who have died innocently of the hands of this type of madness. And you may say, well, George Floyd didn't die of a gun. No, George Floyd didn't die of a gun. George Floyd died of a police officer putting his knee to his neck and cutting off his oxygen supply to the point that he died about 8 minutes and 46 seconds after that all had occurred. So he died an unjust death. Just like the man that got shot in Atlanta. That man did deserve to be punished for DUI, but the punishment for DUI is not death. So another person has died another death. And we continue to keep seeing this again and again. One of the main reasons why that I wanted to put George Floyd on this particular plaque was in honor of a counterfeit bill, $20 bill, to where if we didn't have counterfeit money, or if we didn't have currency money that represents money, maybe that event never would have occurred towards an individual's life that got taken over the good old American dollar bill. It's really sad because the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And whenever you have a society that has this type of love to the point that they're willing to produce artificial counterfeit money, much less die for it, or remain in prison for 20 plus years or longer, or rob a bank, you have a problem in people prioritizing currency above and beyond where they should be privatizing their lives. So because these things have struck me in the wrong way, and because of our military, we decided to memorialize both of them together, bringing things together here. You may ask, well, what in the heck is this? Well, these are just some railroad timbers that my father already had on the property that my helper and I helped to re-engineer, and we buried those 4 foot in the ground and buried those in concrete. And it also, your big heavy pipe to prevent from some automobile driving in there or a four-wheeler and tearing up a bunch of stuff. We're trying to fix it to where we don't have to worry about it being vandalized, because we have been vandalized here on this property more than once. Matter of fact, we have been vandalized several times because of idiots that didn't want to mind their own business. And it's one thing if you don't appreciate or if you don't admire what we're a part of out here. That's fine. We don't have a problem in that. But to think that people thinks that they have the right to come out here and to vandalize memorial sites, cut people's posts down, cut peace signs from the broken cross, and to create havoc on innocent people's lives is a tattletale sign towards what type of society that we live in today. And it's really, really sad whenever we live in a society to where people don't care for other people's property and don't care for other people's rights and for other people's stuff that they have. And like we've said before, coming from the St. Dale's Recovery Shelter here at 430 Beach Grove Road and 291 Thompson Road, that's pertaining to the healing that Matthew chapter 11 verse 28 and 30 speaks of around the 3 H's: habits, hang-ups, and heartaches. We just want to say that these dreams did not just begin with my brother and I about 6 years ago whenever I first come back here in 2014. These dreams began with a woman and her husband that purchased this property in 1937 after the Great Depression, towards them coming out here and building a sanctuary that was for the benefit of all people, especially those who had went through such rigorous examples in their life. Once more, we want to thank you for being a part of the Windmill Ministries. And we want to say on this 4th of July coming up in 2020, good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us on our Independence Day that our ancestors, our forefathers, was willing to sacrifice all for what we have today. Because the way that it looks pertaining to the protest and pertaining to the diseases and pertaining to all the other problems with the money issues and the police brutality and all the protesting going on, it looks like we're in stormy weather. And unless we have good leadership in being able to identify this stormy weather that we're in, towards pulling us out of this stormy weather that we're in, I'm just afraid that instead of things getting better, in actuality, they're only going to get worse. So please, we ask to our viewers, keep us in your prayers, and let's always remember those who sacrificed so much on this Independence Day coming up, beginning with the Lord Jesus Christ. Because it was the Lord Jesus Christ that hung on this cross, or a cross similar to this, that hung on the cross, that tried to conform humanity, but humanity didn't want to conform because of greed, selfishness, and thousands of other reasons why that they didn't want to conform. We just wanted to play a part in our message out here towards what we are, what we believe in, who we believe in, why we believe in what we believe in. And if you feel like it, come by and give us a toot, honk the horn, wave at us. Feel free to stop by and drink a glass of Kool-Aid, coffee, tea, water, and help us out with our dreams, our inspirations towards wanting to help others in a peaceful, productive society. The main concept in behind this thinking that the Windmill Ministries has played a part of is based around post-traumatic stress disorder of our men and women that come back from the military who have obvious, deep psychological problems that go beyond most people's comprehension, that has never had to deal with these military wars, with these military scars. So our concept out here remains and still remains and will continue to remain with the military ministry in regards to our men and women that come back from home, that the battle is over, but the fight has just begun in honor of our veterans. The fight of them having to blend back into society and be accepted by the civilian life. The fight to be able to understand that they can't talk and act and project their attitude in the civilian life like they did in the military life. To fight for their families, not only overseas, but to fight for them over here too as well, once they come home. This great sickness that engulfs our military, those with post-traumatic stress disorder, we wanted to enlighten the community and tell others about that in which what has occurred in our personal lives. That way, maybe, just maybe, we could help prevent from other people going through similar type hurts, similar type scars, psychological, emotional scars that the military people bring up onto their loved ones, and they don't even realize a lot of times that they're bringing this up onto them. We just want to say that on the 75th anniversary of World War II, that it's time that we started being sensitive to other people's feelings, regardless whether it was our military or regardless whether it was Black Lives Matter, because Black lives do matter. Spanish lives matter. China's lives matter. Russians' lives matter. Canadians' lives matter. South American lives matter. Cuban lives matter. All people's lives matter. Beginning with the Jewish people that suffered during the Holocaust 75 years ago, that went through what they went through simply because of a madman. On this 75th anniversary that we've now went through, may we never forget those who done the ultimate sacrifice, not only during World War II, but in other wars that has been projected and distributed here amongst our great people, our great nation. And may we continue to always, always hold these people up in great prayer in what they have done, and never forgetting up onto our freedoms that we have that could be taken away in an instant if we do not watch. My father's branch was called the Chiefs. The Chiefs up in Washington State, 2nd Infantry. 1st Infantry is out of Kansas City, somewhere in Kansas, the state of Kansas. May not be Kansas City, maybe just Kansas. But in honor of the Chiefs, the 2nd Infantry, in honor of the 75th anniversary in honor of Black Lives Matter, of various people's lives that have sacrificed so much. We decided that we would do this in the community in a memorial for our loved ones. And whenever I say our loved ones, I'm not just talking about one or two people. I'm talking about all of them. You must be born again. John 3:7. For Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6. You must be born again. That's the only way that we as a society are going to become whole and cured from these endeavors that Satan has placed up into a lot of our lives. Whosoever shall calleth upon the name of the Lord, according to Romans chapter 10, verse 13, shall be saved. Thanks again. Good luck to all of us. And shalom.